Hi, everyone, and welcome to Life After Lit. I am Jeff Middents, and I'm here with a fabulous panel of extraordinary women that are going to actually talk about all sorts of things. Like we just quickly discussed about how old everyone is now and how old I am in particular. But I'm really excited to see you guys back. Welcome back. The advantage of Zoom is that although most of you are actually still in DC, not all of you are in DC. And so this is like one of the cool things that we could actually bring some folks who otherwise would not have been able to come to this particular event. This is going to be super casual in terms of sort of a chat between us. I've spotlighted all of us. We are missing one person who is coming just a little bit later. She'll join us in just a bit, and that's Zhang McCauley. She'll be joining us she just has tons of work to do and has a whole bunch of things to like attend to. She'll be here as soon as she can. For everyone else, so we're basically like, so there's a bunch of folks. So let's put that out. It's going to take us a little while to actually even get through introductions, as Rachel was saying. But what we'll start with, and by the way, throughout all of this, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you'd like to, shout out to whatever, please do so in the chat. I will try to keep track of the chat as best as I can. And we are definitely going to have time at some point for like questions, answers, and discussion. I'll take down all the spotlights and we can all look at each other and deal accordingly. And this is being recorded, by the way, so if you, for some reason, have to drop off and want to catch the rest of this later, you can. So the first sort of question, basic question for all of you is basically as a form of introduction and very briefly to sort of say who you are, when did you graduate, what are you doing now? Basically, like as a really like basic sort of thing. I'm gonna go, I think, in alphabetical order here, and so I will start with Isabella.
Hi, I'm Isabella Austin. I graduated from AU in December 2018. I'm currently living in the LA area where I grew up, so I think I'm probably the only one that's not in DC anymore. I don't know. So I'm currently an associate editor of social science journals at Sage Publishing, and Sage publishes over 1,000 academic journals globally. And as an associate editor, I manage journals in the business and management and criminology fields.
Right on. Emma?
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Bartley. I graduated from AU in 2017, literature major on the cinema studies track, who also did some creative writing at the end of her degree. I actually grew up in the DC area and lived there for many years after I graduated, but I just recently this year moved to Brooklyn. So that is where I am Zooming from right now. And I work at the National Endowment for the Arts. For those of you who don't know what that is, the National Endowment for the Arts is the federal agency that provides grants to arts and cultural organizations across the country. So I do grants management. I specifically work on the museums and visual arts nonprofit portfolios, managing their awards, administering panels, stuff like that.
Awesome. Iliana?
I'm Iliana Espinal. I graduated in 2015. I would hope I'm not the only interdisciplinary person, but I also graduated with a degree in mathematics. With that, I started working at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, where I've been for the last 6 years. I started off actually more so what Isabella did in terms of the journals and reviewing things in the health and science or health and medicine division. I now currently work more in a D&I space, so creating more channels for appointments and spaces for all the work that we do across all our portfolios. So on a given day, I look at things that are in relation to COVID-19 and also in what are we doing in space right now.
Awesome. Ashley.
Hi, my name is Ashley Joyce. I graduated in May of 2011. So it's been over 10 years now. And I was a literature major with a cinema studies minor. I graduated a little too early to benefit from the cinema studies track, but I definitely would have done that. And I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I am currently an associate director of communications at Johns Hopkins University. So I sit in the office of the vice provost for student affairs at Johns Hopkins. So, very similar to how things are structured at AU, student affairs encompasses basically everything outside of the academic experience at the university. So I'm involved in all kinds of communications activities, managing web content. I do a lot of writing of emails and talking points and stuff like that. A lot of creating marketing materials for various things that are going on at the university. So it's nice to be back on a college campus and back in higher ed. So looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Thanks, Ashley. Lorie?
Hi, I'm Lorie Mchugh. I graduated from AU in 2013 I also I didn't have a literature major. This is where I have to confess. I was a literature minor. Don't tell anybody, it doesn't leave this chat. I had a print journalism degree, if you can believe it, which is funny to think about now. I had a major in print journalism, minor in literature, and a minor in graphic design. So I was kind of all over the place. And now I'm actually back at AU, funny enough. I work at WAMU, the NPR member station here in DC. And specifically for our web presence, I'm the breaking news editor at DCist, the local news site run by WAMU. So I'm doing lots of news and some radio and some hosting as well, which is really fun. And I'm excited to dive into this convo. Thanks.
Awesome. Kelsey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Paul. I graduated May 2019, so not that long ago. Since then, I have been a social media producer, multimedia journalist at Voice of America, which is the largest US international broadcaster. We provide news and information in over 40 languages. So that's what I've been doing. And I'm located in Washington, DC right now.
And last but not least, Rachel.
Hi, my name is Rachel Tardiff. I am currently the Senior Advisor for People and Culture at Media Matters for America. I graduated in 2011 with Ashley, and I was a double major, public communications and literature. I graduated from college and started working as a media relations and communications consultant at a small firm where I stayed for a bunch of years before coming to Media Matters. And I worked in a variety of capacities at the organization. If you don't know Media Matters, we are a progressive research center and media watchdog that monitors for and corrects conservative misinformation in the media. So it's been a busy last several years. And I have worked in organizational partnerships, I've worked in program management, and now I'm a member of the executive leadership team, helping to grow the organization at a pretty significant moment of organizational growth. Spoiler alert, I'm hiring a bunch of positions. So if that is an organizational mission that appeals to you, you should apply.
Not for nothing, she has jobs. So let's chat a little bit about the paths that you guys, and now it's sort of more open for you all. What was the path that you took to get to where you're at? You all are at different points from your departure from AU. How did you get to where you are now?
I could start if no one minds. So yeah, I have to give a lot of credit to AU. I was very involved on campus. And a lot of those experiences that I had on campus, outside of the classroom really helped kickstart my career, I think. So on campus, I was a teaching assistant for Critical Approach to Cinema, I think. And I worked in the library, and probably most impactful for me was I was very involved in the literary magazine Hamlet for all 4 years that I was there, and I was the editor-in-chief my senior year, which was just a really great learning opportunity. For those of you who don't know, that's like a year-long paid position, or it was at the time I was there. And you really get a good idea of how to run like a small arts organization. So I knew that I wanted to go into public arts and humanities after I graduated. I wanted to work like in public programming, and I started off at a very small nonprofit called Split This Rock. Split This Rock is a poetry and social justice nonprofit, very small, localized, but they do really awesome, a variety of poetry programming in the city. So they do like workshops, all free, poetry slams, other poetry events, poetry competitions, that are all kind of dealing with relevant social justice issues. And I started off as an administrative assistant. And, I didn't really think that my job, was that significant, but I was on a staff with 5 people. And so I really got the opportunity to work on pretty much every facet of the organization. Like I was doing a little bit of communications, a little bit of bookkeeping, a little bit of fundraising and development, and then working on our public programming as well, and doing kind of logistics for that. It was a stressful job, it was a small, tight ship. But I kind of I look back on that experience fondly. We're starting at a very small organization where you can kind of get your hands on a lot of different things. And I realized I was kind of interested in the fundraising aspect, which not that many people are interested in who go into public arts and humanities. And that's kind of what led me to go into the funding sphere at the National Endowment for the Arts, where I'm kind of on the opposite end, giving out grants. So that was my start.
I could go next. That's okay. So I should have also mentioned what I studied, and I did broadcast journalism as my major, and I did literature cinema studies as a minor. And I feel like that combination really helped me land certain internships. And that's how I got my current job. So I found my first internship through a job and internship fair. That's how it all got started. And it was with VOA 60 News. So I was working on 1-minute videos of daily news, and we would share those with our online audience, and we worked on World, Asia, Africa, and America. This internship then helped me get the SOC Dean's internship in the documentary unit. So that also was helpful, having a literature cinema studies background too, because I knew I had studied some things in documentary. And that position helped me get another internship. So I think the key is just to keep pushing forward and, do everything that you want to do in terms of getting the experience before you go on and graduate. So my third internship was actually after graduation, a summer internship. And I was there for 3 months at Agency France Press, which is another international news organization and wire service. And there I worked on web and social media. And then that internship helped me get my job. And that's how I was able to land a social media producer role at Voice of America through my connections and also through my academic background. So I didn't really know that's how it was going to be when I first started freshman year. But through opportunities that I was able to find at American, it got me to the job that I currently have and that I really enjoy. So that's my little piece.
I can go next. I had kind of a similar overall journey as Kelsey. So at my first semester at AU, I was part of AU's mentorship program where you can work and study. So it was 2 days a week, and they would give you those 2 days to work at an internship. So I got an internship at a small PBS show, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but it was, women centered, and it sounded really interesting. So I took it. And it was one thing that I did at that internship that led me to my next one at a environmental nonprofit book and textbook publisher in DC. They're called Island Press. So once I got into their organization as a publicity intern, then I was able to advocate myself for their editorial internship position, which is the one I really wanted. So it was kind of a similar-ish where I didn't start exactly where I wanted to be, but I did slowly get to more of my goal of working in publishing, book and textbook publishing. So then after graduating AU, I think it was all of those unique internship experiences and the degree in literature that made Sage consider me for their editorial assistant position. So this is the first company I've had a full-time job with. So I don't have a lot of journey after AU graduation to talk about. But I did find opportunities within Sage to get promoted to this associate editor position.
I guess I'll go next. I feel like I've had the opposite type of journey as everyone else on the call so far, which is I more or less learned what I wanted to get to by doing things that definitely made me uncomfortable. I would by nature say I'm more introverted, and my vision truly after I was doing my lit degree was that I was going to go into comparative literature PhD, mostly focusing on biological / math texts. So if you asked me like 5-6 years ago, that's definitely what I thought I would be doing. So that means less talking to people, definitely means a less understanding of like smaller concepts of interpersonal conversation. I decided that I think it was actually after a conversation with Jeff to do things that made me uncomfortable, which led me to the types of jobs that I had during undergrad. I did a lot more translation. I'm multilingual, and that was something I definitely did not think was a skill that was sought for or really searched for at all. I was also a first generation student in terms of higher education, at least in the States. So it was also a lot of that, of not really understanding who to reach out to, and generally not having a larger network. So I would say I heavily leaned onto the available staff. I spoke to a lot of people in my math department that I felt really comfortable with, obviously Jeff. Also, if anyone else has classes with them, it's Amanda Berry. I TA'd for her, and also Fiona Brightoak was a really great resource for me of understanding what my skill set was and generally what I needed to grow and making yourself uncomfortable is a really big aspect of that. So I did work with LAYC, which is the Latin American Youth Centers, which are here in DC, and that makes you talk to middle school and elementary school children, which I would say is also really good in the long term. You have to be able to communicate with everyone. And that was a big aspect for me that I learned about myself in getting to talking about science and very complex types of ideas and policy work with a lay person. So after about 3 years, I ended up working at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And to echo everyone else, you do end up in a position that you're not necessarily certain, like why this title fits my skill set, but you do get to do a hodgepodge of things and then really understand what you want to grow and nurture. For myself, it really was SciComms or science communications, which is basically what I do now. You do get to be a little bit more in the weeds, which I guess to some people, depending on where you are in the lit atmosphere, you might like or you might really dislike, but that's something that's really important to understand, especially when you're trying to choose a career. Yeah, definitely looking at job postings, seeing what fits with you, but also seeing the environment in which you work with. At least I don't think I've heard that being said before, is really important. I definitely walked into a lot of spaces, I would say AU was one of them, that a lot of people did not look like me. And that definitely forces you to understand whether or not, which is kind of weird, you want to deal with that for a longer amount of time. And I think for myself, I decided that was not something that I wanted to deal with for a prolonged amount of spaces. So definitely understanding what parts of yourself you're willing to engage with, and also what parts of yourself you want to bring to the workplace is a really important question to ask yourself when you're applying to jobs.
I can go. First of all, I definitely want to hear more about biological text, Iliana. I have so many questions about this. I feel like my story is not that interesting. I definitely changed my major a few times, which I was a theater major for about 45 minutes. That didn't work out. But yeah, I knew I wanted to be in a newsroom, and I also did like a handful of internships, and definitely took some that I think I had this kind of messed up mindset that I was like, oh, if a semester goes by and I don't have an internship, like I'm really messing up, like I'm really wasting my time, which no, like that's not true. Like learning and I don't know, becoming the person you're supposed to become while you're in this time in your life is hard enough, you know? And like, I don't know, I think I wish I had put a little less pressure on myself to like get all these internships that I don't think were always great fits for me. But yeah, I did a couple of newsroom internships, and that was, and from there, it was a lot of networking. I interned at the Washington Post Express, which is it was a free daily paper that was in the Metro, run out of the Washington Post. And then a few years later, I knew who to call when I saw they had a position open. Then I had a contact who was restarting DCist, a local news site, and I moved into this position. But I would say that like in terms of how the lit major applies to this, I was an entertainment journalist for like 8 years after that was my beat. And it was largely informed by a lot of things that I learned in my lit classes. I did a lot of writing about film. I did a lot of writing and editing, I should say, about like local authors and local theater. And that was, I could not have done confidently and on like a newsroom timeline without, I guess, having the context that I got from a lot of my lit classes. So that just bring it full circle. That's my spiel.
Go next. So I don't think I really, started my career path with a ton of intentionality. When I started undergrad at AU, I did not know what I wanted to do professionally. When I graduated, I still didn't know what I wanted to do professionally. And I'm not sure I know now. It's been a lot of trying different things and seeing, what I respond to over the years. But immediately after college, I was an executive assistant at a tutoring company in New York for a bit, mostly because I really wanted to live in New York, and that's where my boyfriend was moving. So the job was kind of less important than being in a city where I could see any movie I wanted at an amazing movie theater. I ended up like doing some retail management and just like a real range of random jobs during those few years that I was in New York. And then in moving back to DC, I started working at nonprofits. I was working in fundraising for a health nonprofit called the National Kidney Foundation. And in doing that, I found that I did not enjoy fundraising at all. But I was good at the writing side of doing like communications and marketing stuff. So, after doing that for a few years, I ended up moving over to a health policy think tank called the Kaiser Family Foundation, and doing kind of very traditional communications and marketing stuff, writing press releases, creating web content, doing like social media posting, stuff like that. After about 5 years of that, I was ready to move out of the health space. Certainly the pandemic kind of hastened that transition. It was really staring into the belly of the beast for a few years. And now I'm at Johns Hopkins. And part of that move for me was definitely wanting to be back in an academic environment. I had a fantastic experience at American University, in large part because of the literature major and Jeff and all of my other fantastic professors. I had fantastic professional opportunities through the literature department. I was a program associate for the Critical Approach to the Cinema University College class, which I also participated in as a freshman in 2007. And I was also a gen ed assistant for some critical approach sections. So, those experiences, were not only fantastic professionally, but, it was also, it helped me financially sustain my education. I think something that really shaped my experience was being at college during the 2008 financial crisis, which was kind of like a moment of, I think, sheer panic for a lot of us. And I think made me very nervous about being able to afford to live after graduating. And I made a lot of, I think, like safe conservative decisions out of that anxiety. I think that we're kind of in a similar moment now where we don't really know what the world is going to look like going forward. I will say one of my takeaways from that experience, from my experience, is just that it's okay not to have all the answers or know exactly what your path looks like. And it's okay to, kind of just see it as a journey and to try different things. Like I said, like I enjoy what I'm doing right now. I don't know that this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And I'm very open to, seeing what comes next. So I think having that perspective that it's okay if you're not sure, would have been valuable to me at the time, and is something that I think I have come to after many years of struggling with it.
I think that sort of just leaves me, but I went through a lot of this in my intro. A lot of the same stuff. Internships, pertinent work study jobs. I worked in the AU Media Relations office from my freshman year. Junior year, I switched over to the Library Public Relations office while doing internships and while TAing classes. I also PA'd a UC cinema class. Ashley and I were in that class as freshmen together, which is great. And then I started working at a small firm. It was that I was connected to by a fellow AU alum, and sort of took it from there. All of my professional development has largely hinged on my ability to write. And to think critically and strategically, all of which are things that I learned more of in my literature major than I did in my more tactically focused public communications major. I sort of made some decisions about the kinds of places that I wanted to work. I knew that I wanted to work in a sort of values-based organization. So I started at a small progressive media firm. I moved to a progressive nonprofit. And of all of the jobs that I've held since graduating from college, I wrote all but one job description. I have consistently found myself in a place where I can sort of articulate what a problem or a need is and describe how I'm the one to fill it and then get that job. So that's been really exciting. That's all 4 of the different capacities that I've been in at Media Matters, and the 3 before that over the course of the last 10 plus years. So that's another thing that I would sort of lend to the lit major as well. I think that this might be the next question, so maybe I'm a little bit ahead, but that's another thing that I would lend to the lit major is really being able to think strategically and critically and analytically in a way that sort of anticipates some needs. That's also probably a bit of my anxiety speaking as well. Yeah, I'd say that is. And then also just like again, to echo some of just like really ongoing and really integral support from many members of the literature department. Speaking of that 2008 financial crisis. There was a period of time earlier in college where it wasn't clear that I was going to be able to stay there as somebody who was paying for my own education. And I stayed enrolled at AU in huge part due to the help and assistance and guidance and support of members of the literature department. So I very much believe that I would not be anywhere close to where I am without the AU Lit department.
All right. So I'm going to take a pause for just a moment here because we now have one more person who just walked in. May, sorry to, like, you literally just came in like this and I'm already throwing you in the mix. But I can tell you what, like in terms of, first of all, if you'd like to introduce yourself to everyone and what are you doing these days? And then I'll ask you the second question in a moment.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is May. I graduated from AU Lit in a transcultural studies track in May 2020, which feels both very recently and long ago at the same time. And I'm currently an editorial assistant at Algonquin Books, which we initially were an indie publisher, but we just got bought out by Hachette, which is one of the big fives. So yeah, I can definitely answer any questions anyone has about what it's like to work in an editorial department at a publishing house.
So the other question that we've actually looked at was, what was your path to actually get to what you're doing today?
I see Professor Youngin's here. I would say that her class in publishing was definitely one of, the major classes that kind of changed the course of my undergraduate career and what I wanted to do in terms of a career. The class in literary editing and publishing, that gave me a really broad overview of what publishing looked like and all the different departments in it. And after taking that class my senior year, I decided that I wanted to try out an internship, and that's kind of what I did after. I also had such amazing professors in the transcultural studies track, such as Professor Wong and Middents and Green Sims, that were just like so foundational to developing what I love to read and the type of books that I wanted to work on as an editor eventually.
Right on. So here's this question, which is always the question, and students don't ask this perhaps enough, but certainly they think about it. It's like, what the hell am I doing with all of these classes? And like, I love reading these things. I love watching these things. I love doing these things. But yeah, does it matter in the future with this? How has lit actually worked for you in the world, as it were?
I'll say, Rachel already spoke to this a little bit, but it will shock you how many people are not able to write well in your professional life. And, I think I'm someone who very much learned to write by doing a lot of reading and learned to write in a more complex way in college, in part because of a lot of the challenging materials I was reading as part of my lit degree. But I have very much been in a similar position of being the person who is tasked with writing things, even when it hasn't been part of my job description, because it is not a common skill set. There will be so many opportunities for you to utilize the writing skills that you develop as a literature major. So I would say that's a big one for me.
Actually, as a side note, just because I know this story, can you tell about the first job that you got as a tutor, your interview for that?
Oh yeah, that is a good story. So when I was interviewing with this, it's like a very fancy tutoring company that helps kids apply to college, and they also do a lot of high school subject matter tutoring. And I was applying for an executive assistant position, and when I was called in for an in-person interview, they mentioned that they had received some crazy number, 100 applications for this very, poorly paid executive assistant role. again, after the financial crisis, there were not a lot of jobs out there. And mine was the only one they received that did not have a typo or like any like serious grammatical issues. And like, that was part of the reason that I got my foot in the door, was they were like, oh, she actually proofread her cover letter and her resume. So yeah, I mean, just little things like that definitely help. And I would say like on the cinema study side of things, I think like having a grasp of visual language is very beneficial. You know, I found myself doing more work in like the graphic design space in recent years. And I think that being able to not only interpret text critically, but images critically is a very useful skill, and one that I'm happy to have professionally.
I guess I'll touch on two other things. One, really to echo, if you are ever in STEM, no one knows how to write. So you will always have that as an evergreen skill. But truly, I guess one of the things that Lit teaches you is to be, I guess would be empathetic, but truly to also understand things from a different perspective than your own. And that is invaluable in the workspace. The same as just generally being able to take criticism and critique as a whole is obviously part of Lit. You go through drafts, you understand also the weaknesses in your own skill set and are able to think that through, which is surprisingly, at least to myself, not something key to other people in terms of what they learn and how to handle that as a form of both professionalism, but how to give that in a constructive way. Because you could easily say, I don't like it, but that's very different than saying, this is what doesn't work as this piece. And I hear you saying and echoing that back, because it could be that they just don't understand how the other person is going to capture what they're trying to say. And that's so much of what we do 24/7 that you perhaps don't necessarily understand that that's completely new to someone else. And to the empathy piece, I think we're all very communal. If there's ever a type of skill that we have, we're always very nice about letting someone else know how to have that skill or teach them, which is also not necessarily true for other people. So in that case, it's also very positive.
Just to go off of that as well, one thing that I think literature classes really helped me with was to understand different perspectives, just as you said. And that's something that I do every day at my job, because we are an international news organization, Voice of America. So it's a very good skill set to have. And it also, in terms of writing and editing and researching, that's something that every Lit class has, and that's something that I do every single day, just to make sure that we are effectively communicating with our audience and making sure that we don't have any grammatical issues or accuracy issues. And that's something that I was able to hone really, really well with my classes. Also, I was also Jeff's TA for Critical Approach to the Cinema, and that actually helped me a lot in terms of editing my own work. And if someone wants me to look at their work at work, that experience really helped me out, because I was able to work with students to help communicate their ideas and edit papers alongside them to make it the best that it can be. And that helps me in my current role, making sure that the posts that we're putting out on social media are concise and accurate and fit social media standards. So that's what I'll say.
Let me throw this editorial out there in terms of, because several folks have mentioned actually TAing for, not everyone on this panel has TA'd for me, although several of them have, but, or TA'd for a lot of folks that were in the Lit department. For current students, and this may come as a big surprise to all the people who have come before, the GFAP program that most of you actually were part of actually disappeared. And so those opportunities are very few and far between these days. Marie Spalding from the Career Center is here. You should tell CORE that particular, like that this is like, they don't hear it from us necessarily. I will say for current students that a good portion of some of those particular experiences can come from working with complex problems, which is actually like definitely pulled up. If you have a professor that is working with a complex problems class, that might be an opportunity that's that wasn't available to most of these folks. Don't even know what complex problems is, like the folks within the grid. But that is probably your better route, like in terms of instead of through one of the other classes that we have, just so you know.
That's a real shame to hear, because I was one of those for Marianne Noble. And if I can teach freshman students how to write a semi-cogent poem, I can do truly anything. A huge part of my job now is training, onboarding staff, and thinking about what the sort of like right constellation of individual professionals is to accomplish a team's goals. And a huge part of that is an understanding and appreciation for context. And that's the more abstract sort of means of it. My organization does close reading. I have a staff of over 100 people, and about 70 of them are employed in close reading media content every single day, and explaining and understanding the influence that misinformation and disinformation have on that coverage and how audiences then consume it, right? That is Lit 101. So just on the face of the mission, it's like extremely close. But overall, I really want to echo what Iliana was saying in particular, right? The empathy, the context, and hearing not just what somebody's telling you, but what is in between, like the words that they're using, so that you can then produce strategic assessments of how to move forward in an effective way, is just close reading people.
I wanted to also, Kelsey, what you say about editing is so true. And I think that like being edited by really smart people helped me love editing and helped me realize like what I love about language and what I love about like, just, I don't know how words work. I wish I had a more elegant way to say that I love words, but like, I didn't really land the plane on this one. But I still remember like some very specific edits that I got from some of my professors. Quick anecdote, Jeff, one time you wrote on one of my papers, you like bracketed a whole paragraph and said, I don't know what this paragraph is accomplishing. And I still remember that. And I think about it a lot because it's like, no, like in a good way. I think about it a lot because it's like first of all, blunt, but I love it. And like, it helped me, I think, understand like, and I was a freshman and I was kind of just like, this is, I don't know what I'm writing, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I think it helped me understand brevity and like being quite intentional with the writing that I'm doing, and made me love the editing process, being edited by really smart brains. So I think even if like TAing is not like something that feels right for you, I still felt that I got a lot out of just like being in class and like writing and getting my darlings killed. Helped me become better at killing other people's darlings, which is part of my job. And yeah, I think it's all still valuable.
I guess I can go. So I was never a TA for anybody during college, but I was going to say for the useful skill that I've kind of taken on from Lit, it might sound really simple, but I want to echo what Ashley said about just like writing skills in general. Even if your job isn't writing grant fundings or creative writing or anything, you're probably going to be writing emails. Just, it depends on the company, depends on the job, but you're going to be writing a lot of emails. And so I think it's really helpful just to simply have that skill of writing a very concise or a very detailed email that can get someone to actually read it. It's a really, really useful skill to have just in everyday life.
Yeah, I'll be super brief because honestly, everything you guys said, I totally relate to. So I don't want to be super repetitive. And the one thing I would bring up is something that Lorie actually did touch on in an earlier answer, is that, you know, the English degree with the focus on cinema studies made a lot of sense for me because I was going into public arts and humanities programming work. So it was very much a part of my job at both Split This Rock and at the NEA to be, you know, cognizant of art history and literary history. And, you know, I'm mostly kind of working with contemporary writers and artists, but still kind of knowing how their work is responding to people that I learned about in college is really important, and has helped me so much. Being able to kind of talk about that with my colleagues is critical, and it makes me really excited about the work, you know, because I came into it I've learned a lot in the past years, and I certainly don't know everything. But I came in with like a solid understanding of kind of the fields.
I guess I'll answer this question a little bit more specifically to my role itself. I'm not sure if anyone here is interested in trade publishing or in like editorial work. If you are, you can send me like a specific message because I'll try to be more specific with my examples, I guess. But for me, I would say like a big part of the editorial assistant job is, you know, like writing copy. So kind of the language you see on like book packaging, whether that's online on like Amazon or Bookshop or on the actual book itself. So obviously like writing that copy is like a big skill that like I leaned on. And I was able to learn like while at AU, not specifically writing copy, but just like writing in general. So and also another big part is writing readers reports. So as you're kind of constantly like reading all these submissions that come into the editors at the imprint you're working at, you want to write these really concise summaries of what you're reading, and also like how they fit in the marketplace, like what they're doing that's different, and et cetera, et cetera. And so writing those really concise reports, I think is a skill that in a couple of my classes, like certain professors really tried to hone in. I remember Professor Wong had quarterly essays that were 500 words. Middents also had like, I think after each reading, he wanted like 200 words, maybe like in response. And I, of course, always wrote like maybe double, triple that. I've always had a problem with being concise, and that has followed me into my job. So really try to stick with those word limits. And especially with readers reports, you know, your boss doesn't have a lot of time to read through like 3 pages, 4 pages of what you have to write. So they really want it to be like a page or less, and just have a quick understanding of what they should do, whether they should like pass on the project or meet with the author. So that's, I guess, like more of a specific example of the skills from Lit and how they apply to my current position right now.
So here's one more question, which, you know, you've all been out for a bit. What did you wish you knew then? Like when you were a student, you know, most of you have mentioned, you know, it's sort of like, I wasn't sure, you know, in terms of what, like, what did you wish you knew?
I wish that I had known to try less hard. Honestly, I especially, you know, coming from the background that I described earlier, working all the way through college, all 4 years of college, I had an immediate expectation that I needed to hit the ground running in anything that I did. And I can only say this like 10 years later, but it completely skewed any semblance of sort of like personal and professional boundaries, work-life balance, big topic these days. And obviously the last 3 years in particular have thrown this into really harsh relief. But I do wish that I had had more of a perspective at the beginning of my career to prioritize like my own self and well-being, especially as somebody who works in like mission-driven and values-based organizations. There's always this feeling that the work is more important and that it's meant to be hard. And I absolutely ran myself ragged, like into my mid to late 20s in a way that I'm only just now starting to sort of recalibrate off of. So I wish that I had had a better sense of sort of like my personal worth as separate from my work value and my productivity. And that is, I think, a lesson that everybody has had to learn pretty harshly in the last several years. But I'm here to tell the current students and soon-to-be graduates that you should work less hard, which I guess is not the typical message for a panel like this, but.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of that a little bit. So my AU was great and it had so many amazing professional opportunities that we've all talked about. But my one qualm with it is that I think there is a culture of professionalism and focusing on figuring out your career that exists there more than I think normal like liberal arts universities. So I, like other people, I was taking a full course load and TAing and working and doing internships. And like, I think honestly, my academics suffered the most. And like, that was the thing that I did not prioritize as much. And, you have the rest of your life to work and you're probably going to, at least for a long time, but school is a really precious opportunity. I really miss being in the classroom. I may go back to grad school, but maybe not because it's really expensive. So I would, I know there's a lot of pressure to like figure out your career, get the internships. And I understand why those are important, but valuing your academic life is something that I wish I did more.
I totally agree. I think like I was like, I want to be in a newsroom, so I'm going to do journalism, and like I would like to be sort of an arts journalist, so I'm going to minor in literature, and I want to be well-rounded, so I'm going to do graphic design. And I think I wish I had been more creative with my course selection. I think all the way down to that. Emma had like a similar experience. I was very like, I'm going to put all of my focus on like the internships that I do and the jobs that I, have after class, and like the TAing and like opportunities like that, because that felt more important than the class, which I look back and I'm like, what was I doing? But, I wish I had, in looking at like the beautiful like buffet of learning in front of me, like, why did I take so many classes? Why was I so focused on like, how quickly can I graduate? How like quickly, or more to it, like, how will this get specifically to the job that I want? Like, I wish I had taken more classes that were quite far outside of my wheelhouse, and that were not things that I had like some knowledge or awareness of. Like, I kind of wish I had picked the classes that were like, ooh, like that. I don't know. That's kind of scary. Like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, I wish I had been a little more brave with those kinds of choices, because I think I would look back on that experience and feel, I think it would have been quite a bit different. So I agree with you all.
I was going to say something similar, so I'll speak now. I think I would say take classes that matter to you. And I think that that's something I would have wanted to do, especially in the beginning of freshman, sophomore year, because I was taking classes that I thought would pair best with my broadcast journalism degree. And towards the middle, I figured out that I liked literature classes the most. So I went with that. Because of how I enjoyed them, and I was passionate about the topics, especially. So I had always been interested in film, literature, and writing, and that's something that I just wanted to go forward with. And I think moving forward with me, I want to go back to school for graduate school to do some more research and build on that too. So I would just say, take classes that matter to you and don't really worry about the end result of like what your degree will be in, or, I think it would matter more like what you would really enjoy.
I guess my advice is slightly different. It's mostly something I learned towards the end of my career in school and, still continuing to, which is to take up space. A big aspect of being in classes, I would say, coming from myself, I was truly coming from a very small high school where it's entirely just nerds. So it was a big kind of adjustment period to be in a class where there's so many people and there is a willingness to let other people speak, but definitely taking up space, that your opinion matters, and also parsing through things in writing and saying them in person are a completely different skill set. So going towards what people were saying before, if you did those 100, 200 words exercises about the reading, you definitely know where you stand. And you can try and say it in person, and it's okay if it's scary, you'll get better. The same thing as talking to people. I know that in Zoom landscape, it's a little bit weirder, but definitely getting to know whoever else is in your class, even if it's through chat, is definitely helpful because you get to see a different perspective either on what you're reading or someone else in the same class. One of the things, Jeff and I ran into each other in person, which is how I found out about this. A bigger aspect for me is that grad students were part of our classes after a certain level, and they really opened the door for me to understand both what I could do after, but also what I was doing in the class at that moment, which is being present with those people at that particular time.
I'll echo what a lot of other people have said. I think be confident in yourself and take risks. I think those are two things that I really, really struggled with in undergrad. And I can see that with more clarity now, looking back on it several years later, but I did not have a lot of confidence in my own abilities. I felt like I had to always do the safest, most responsible thing. And I think that if I had been in a better place, mentally and emotionally, I would have done more, and just, tried more things. And I think that, if there's anything that you can identify that you can do to take care of yourself, when you're going through rough patches in school, I think it will pay off and that you'll feel better, but it will also pay off and that you'll feel more able to do things that are outside of your comfort zone. And I think that can really be a good experience.
Yeah, similar to everyone else, I started at AU undecided, and I just took every class that I thought sounded even remotely interesting to me. So I took, anthropology classes, sociology, of course, literature, and some marketing classes. And I ended up with a literature major with a marketing minor, which is a lot weird for a lot of people, but it was really nice for me to have that balance, and be able to go into a marketing class and there's only one right answer, and then go back to a literature class where I get to discuss and parse out a lot of different answers to questions. So I think having that opportunity to take classes and things that you feel you might not enjoy, but just something about that class might just spark your interest, I would say just go for it. And the same applies to internships and jobs. Even if you think you have enough experience for the job but you're not really quite sure if you'll enjoy it, I think if there's just one thing in that job description that kind of piques your interest and you want to, I would say just apply for it. Don't worry so much about this is the perfect class for me or this is the perfect job. It's more about just trying new things to figure out what you like and don't like.
One last thing, I think what everyone said has been really great. And I honestly kind of forget the original question now, but I think that one thing that I would say is to really trust your gut with the people and the spaces and the material that you feel safest and most comfortable around. That was definitely a process for me to do during undergrad, and just trusting, the certain classes that I was really gravitating towards was just so crucial to understanding myself and what I wanted to do. And I think following that gut as an adult, that's something I feel I'm trying to figure out right now too. So just trying to remind myself that that I once did it in undergrad and I can do it again. So yeah, sorry, I kind of forgot the original question.
Well, the original question is, what would you tell yourself? Like, what did you wish you knew now? But actually, from your question, and I'm going to open this up now, so folks who might have questions out there, I'm actually going to take the spotlights off of all of us so that we can all sort of come in together with this. But I actually want to go back to something, Iliana, that you said like much earlier in this conversation, which is about finding your spaces, like finding spaces for people who look like you, who people like, you know, in terms of and finding your voice with this. How did you do that? Like, there's like, you know, how, because that is a skill.
I'm maniacally laughing because I was the only one in both. So for slight context, I double majored, double minored, or I guess it should be triple. I came in with an associate's degree from my undergrad, or technically high school, and AU gave me funding for 4 years. So I was like, yes, I will trick or treat for 4 years. And that's how I ended up in the lit department and also the math department. I did minors in creative writing and in biology. And I truly, in lit and math spaces, I was the only person who looked like myself. So in that case, you can either kind of like, you know, shrink, or you can just arrive being who you are. And that was, I guess, the choice I made is that I wasn't going to shrink out because I was the only one. So in that aspect, I think it was more of a curatorial practice, perhaps, of seeing, I guess maybe in Zoom space is very different, but I would definitely sit next to people I felt the most comfortable around. Because if you know you're going to be partnered in terms of discussing things, it would be easier to do that. The same thing as in certain aspects, what everyone else is saying as well, in terms of looking at the catalog of courses that are coming up, I would deliberately choose professors that perhaps I hadn't necessarily interacted with, but I had seen, and I would ask another professor what if they thought we would vibe. So that's how I ended up doing my thesis a year early, is that everyone was telling me I should do my thesis with one particular professor, and that would be the seminar. And they're coming off a sabbatical. It's a great opportunity. That I think it's a lot of that, understanding that when you're the only one, you're a mirror and a window. Other people are going to see you and try to come through, and also cultivating a space for them. But in a certain aspect, that everyone who's around you is not going to be a perfect reflection. So while I had classes with like Danielle Evans and Keith Leonard, they're different representations of what it's like to be Black. For context, I'm Afro-Latina, so there's no other Afro-Latina at that point in time who is on staff. That it was also about that, understanding that telling people I'm multilingual and perhaps like my writing is going to have a little bit of issues because I'm automatically translating things is also an aspect of that, where you have to understand that you're constantly showing up as your entire self, and other people have that as an automatically granted space, and that you should do that for yourself because you deserve it. And I think that was a big one. Yeah.
So the floor is now open in terms of other things. I'll point out once again, Maria Spalding is here from the Career Center as well, and is a literature sort of liaison to the Career Center directly. And there may be all sorts of questions. Melissa, join us on camera if you want to.
I'm on camera, Jeff.
No, everyone else, not you.
Oh, I'm right here. I think this is so amazing. This is really, really great to have everyone back and to learn from everyone and to have such a rich experience. I'm teaching literary editing and publishing right now. Several of my students are here, and I'm so excited that Jeff's recording this so that I can share it with them this week in class, because this is exactly the type of talk that they need to hear from their peers. I wanted to ask Iliana and anyone else who was a first generation college student, which I am also, and I'm a professor here at AU, and I never quite fit in. And I always wonder if if you find yourself in the world as a first gen student still sort of not fitting in, or is that different, you think, with life after lit, or is that, I hope it's an asset. I always hope it's an asset, not a liability. But maybe Iliana or anyone else who's first gen could speak to that challenge.
I would say it was an asset, but I'm also in a very strange industry where I get to see other people who are first gen in different aspects as well. So I guess maybe depending on where you are, we interact with each other so often that it's not necessarily a hindrance or in any way a type of experience you can't openly speak about. The same thing is, I would say for myself, truly today we had a talk at my job with a professor from AU named Brendan McCowan, who talks about affinity groups and specifically things in relation to Black men in STEM, which of course in STEM is a big, true, a pipeline that we're trying to work on, that there's also other aspects of being a first. So while perhaps to your own perspective, they're not a first, it could be the first white person who's in a space. It could be that this is the first time that they're in that space as a professional, or they're returning to work. That happens more often than not for women returning to the workplace after becoming a caregiver in some capacity. That there's a lot of empathy, I would say, as a first gen that we have for other persons and how to acclimate back into spaces. So I would say for myself personally, it has not been a hindrance. And in fact, you find a lot of community in that.
Thank you for that. I have one more question for everybody, and this reminds me of being more familiar, May, with the path that you took. May 2020 was not an ideal time to graduate. 2008 wasn't an ideal time to graduate. 2022 is not necessarily an ideal time. I think of different speed bumps for sure, but also just things that have been sort of paralyzing in trying to get to the next step in your career, or at least wanting to work in an industry that you're interested in. And you're all now in industries and jobs, you are employed. This looks pretty good, but I remember that path May being a little bit more full of angst. And I wonder if people could speak and advise students who are getting ready to have a life after lit, what they need to, what advice you would give them in that in-between space.
I think what I would say is this. When I graduated from undergrad, I thought that I was just going to work for 2 years in communications, then I was going to go back to school, that it needed to be a very one-to-one translation, what I studied to what I did. And while there's a lot that's transferable in my experience, like I didn't study nonprofit management in college, but that's what I'm doing now. And so I think, and this goes back to what all of us were saying about like being able to write, being able to think critically, thinking really just concretely about what it is that you are capable of, and how that translates into a day-to-day job is really important. I think that and thinking about more of the substance of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis rather than sort of like the name that's above the door of where you're doing it is another thing that's really important. And especially if you're just starting out, if you have a sort of dream job in mind, a dream industry, a dream company, any of that, think about who like several of their competitors are, or smaller versions of them are, and then see if those people are hiring too, because you might not get to the quote unquote, what is a dream job? It doesn't exist, but you might not get to sort of like the dream credential right away, but you can think strategically about how, like what experience you need to learn to get there, what experience you need to gain to get there. And sometimes, more often than not, that's not linear. Remember that the job market that we are all on, and just like what work looks like now is not the same thing as your parents either. So don't get discouraged when they like tell you about the ways that like things that they did things like, right, like the job market that I graduated into is different than the job market now. Like work is patently different now, especially after the last 2.5 years. So think sort of strategically about how you make your case and you make your argument based on what it is that you're capable of, rather than thinking that it has to be a really direct translation from I studied this and therefore I will do that.
I can share some angst that I experienced immediately after graduating. And actually also when I decided I was going to transition out of my first job to the National Endowment for the Arts, before I got that job, I've applied to so many jobs in my life. Like when I first graduated, it took me probably like maybe like 4 or 5 months to get that job. And I really, yeah, I applied to a lot of jobs and I did a lot of interviews and I got rejected from a lot of places. And actually I was originally rejected from Split This Rock, the first organization that I worked at. I got pretty far in the interview process and then it was me and one other candidate and they chose the other person, but then that other candidate had to leave. And so I got the job, so like that stuff happens. I've had other jobs where I got rejected, but the person really likes me. They kept me on file. They reached back out to me for another opportunity later on. They referred me to another person that was hiring. I guess my point is you're gonna, once you get on the job market, like it is angsty. There's a lot of rejection. It's a lot of work also, that can feel really demoralizing, but every like application that you put out and every like interview that you have opens up a door to something else. Like it either gives you a new skill, it gets you better at interviewing and just talking to people in general. You learn more about whatever field you're interviewing in. You learn something new about an organization if you interview there. You can work on your resume. There's just like, there's endless like benefits that come out of all the really rough stuff involved in applying for and getting rejected for jobs. So just keep your head up. It happens to everybody. And good things will come.
I'll jump in here. I think this is a really interesting question because I still feel very much like steeped in that angst in a way. I graduated in May 2020 during the pandemic. I'm still working from home. When the pandemic hit, I came home home to my childhood home for a spring break. Graduated there, did my thesis there. I'm still here because, specifically in publishing, there's just a lot of conversations around like having livable wages. There's just been a lot of changes in the industry that has happened honestly like since 2020. And for me, like financially, it makes the most sense to be at home still. So I very much still feel in that angst where it's like, I still have never met so many of my colleagues in person. I've still never seen what this job even looks like in person. I've only seen what it's like remotely through a screen. And so there is just kind of like a lot of uncertainty and hardships that come with that sometimes, but there's also been a lot of positives in terms of like having the opportunity to be able to live at home and work for the year and be able to save up to eventually move to New York, because New York cost of living is so expensive, in addition to DC and like so many other cities. So I've just been really grateful for the opportunity, and like so many internships in publishing right now are still offering remote internships, which I took advantage of. I graduated in May and I took kind of the late summer. I was like working at a bookstore and then doing my remote internship, which was just so helpful. And I think, like coming to terms with like we're graduating in a very uncertain and difficult time, and it's okay if you're not getting a job right away. I feel like there's so much pressure too, and it's also important to like take that time for yourself to explore it. And if you have the opportunity, if you have like a safe environment to return home to in terms of like living at home, like with your parents again, like I think that, a lot of people don't talk about that being like something there's always like a pressure, like, oh, I already like went to school in DC at AU, like I should just like move out and like start my life and everything. And I think that there is, a lot of benefits to doing that if that is like a safe and welcoming and like, an option for you. Yeah.
I'll also say that, as much as this is a strange time for work and a difficult time, I also think it's an interesting point in history where there is a lot of reconsidering of what work can look like And I think the rights of workers are at the forefront in a way that they haven't been, at least in my lifetime. So, I would say that even when you're looking at those entry-level jobs right after you graduate, know your worth and know that you have leverage. If you are, an appealing competitive candidate, which I truly believe, everyone coming out of AU's Lit department is, you can ask for what you need and what you want, and you can, consider your options. Don't feel like you have to take the first job that's offered to you if it's not on terms that are appealing or that will advance your goals. It is a competitive job market right now, and there's a lot of opportunity out there. So I would say, don't feel like you have to take the first thing that comes your way, and ask for what you need and what you want. Think about what you want your life outside of work to look like, and whether or not that job is going to fit into that. That's something that it took me a long time to figure out, is that I need to make choices about work that reflect what I want all of the other hours of my week to look like. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind as you're entering this very unusual but potentially advantageous job market.
Iliana, you had your hand up before.
Yeah, I was gonna answer a question in the chat, which is 100% my own experience, is applying to jobs that you don't feel 100% qualified for. And I say that that's everybody. It might be on paper, you might think like 100% a person has all of these skills. Is that if you feel that there's, I would say like 2 or 3 that you are maybe 50% on, just the willingness of saying in, what is it called? Your like letter, that you're open to learning those skills and what skills you have that are close to that. Truly impeccable, amazing, because what they're looking for is a person who's willing to grow in the position, as opposed to someone who checks off a box to have all of the skill set and that's about it. I would say, again, kind of echoing what May has just said, I am originally from New York, and at my job market coming out, I knew I did not want to go back because I could not afford to go back. So it was mostly what can I do in order to be able to sustain myself in some way, shape, or form. At that point, it was not remote, it was in person only. Where can you see yourself living? That's not a consideration anymore. There are so many places that are hybrid or that are remote that you do have more of a net that's open of where you can apply, which is a benefit. Don't think that returning back home is like somehow negative. And on top of that is, if you have skill sets that are slashed, it's like truly 1 or 2 deviations away from what they're asking for, just apply anyway. A lot of what I did is like, I had clear database math background, and what they were asking for is like very particular skills. Like, well, I clearly have other skills that are in researching, and that shows that I can do it. I just don't know this one platform that you're talking about. I'm willing to learn how to use Tableau, but I have a background in Python and R. So similar skill sets, but I'm not exactly like a one-to-one fit, that you'll still get that interview. You'll still get pulled in because it shows a willingness to be there. And truly, at least for myself, being a hiring like manager, it does work. You do get considered. It also showcases a full human behind the resume, instead of it feeling like kind of a sea of words, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what's been said. I will say for this not my current job, but when I first applied to Sage as an editorial assistant, I remember looking at that job description and thinking that it sounded like 3 jobs in one, because at that point I had looked at so many job descriptions and I kind of knew, what to look for. But then I saw that one and I thought, oh wow, I don't know how to do most of these things, but I do know that academic publishing is interesting to me, and I know I meet some of the requirements. And what I did, before the interview, I researched. I didn't know, for example, like what an impact factor was. So I researched what that was, and I guess that they thought that I did a little bit more work than maybe other applicants to show them that even if I wasn't instinctually knowledgeable, that I was willing to research and learn, like Iliana said, and, you know, be valuable to them.
Rachel, I want to put you on the spot. You started out by saying you're hiring. What are you looking for? Like, what should, I mean, everyone's talking about what things you should be actually, like, you know, emphasizing.
Mhm.
What do you say?
Yeah, I do a lot of hiring. And I hire for a range of positions. It's a little bit different on the roles, but if I'm talking about the bulk of my staff, which is researchers of varying levels of seniority and sort of expertise, I would echo what Iliana said, which is use your cover letter as a way to hide. There are very few people who are 100% qualified for any given job. Right? If you see, again, 2 or 3 things in those core responsibilities that are what you want to be doing or something you have experience doing or something related to something that you have been doing, apply for the job. So what I look for really specifically and concretely, and different hiring managers are different, so take this with a grain of salt, but what I want to know, especially for some of my more sort of entry level or junior positions, is how your experience speaks to the core responsibilities that are in the job description that pulled you in the first place, and very specifically what it is about the organization in addition to the role that is compelling to you. Why do you want to spend the bulk of your time at this, like sitting in front of a computer for this place, doing work for this place? And so yeah, really reconsider whether or not it makes sense to submit that super generic cover letter that says like your organization in it. That's a big one. If you can't spend the time to sort of like update that one page to be specifically pertinent to the role and the place where you're applying, that's absolutely going to influence the amount of time that I spend reviewing it. So yeah, don't be afraid to, it's easier said than done, honestly, and obviously, but you're never going to see yourself 100% in a job description. But if you can check some boxes and make the case, I think that that's ultimately going to be it. And, you know, I am talking about researchers who don't necessarily have the sort of like STEM-based hard skill technical parameters, right, that some other positions might have. I really just need people who can think strategically and critically, and then communicate how to push back on that misinformation. So I'm in part, like, your cover letter is a piece of collateral in my evaluation of that overall. I hate cover letters. I hate writing them. I've always hated writing them. You know, in some ways I think they're really silly, but I think you need to be able to make that case and sort of show yourself apart in that, and also in the job description, I mean, in your resume as well, especially as you develop more professional experience. You're going to want to tailor that to speak to the job that's on paper and posted. This is all really boring stuff, but I want it to be clear to me that you saw this job description, you said like that resonates with me for XYZ reason. I'm going to communicate that directly, rather than just assuming that you get it based on this like task that I did at this other place where I worked. So yeah, do your homework in that sense, and put that effort into it, and prepare for interviews. Like this sounds sort of silly, but like be able to speak specifically to the place where you're applying a little bit more in that context, and make that case for why, if you don't have the skill directly, why the experience that you do have could be transferable or generalizable to the place where you want to be, or, as was mentioned previously, sort of like how that gap could easily be filled, to make you sort of pertinent there. Yeah, that's some of the basics. It's boring.
Any other questions out there? Mia, go for it.
Hello. I'm not sure how, I guess, like significant my question will be to this panel, but I was just wondering if there's a way that you know how to navigate the line between having a traditional job versus going like the art route with like literature, like focusing on craft over, like the technical stuff, if that makes sense.
I guess I can speak to it on a slant. So I still live with someone I met at AU, and he's now an educator at or professor for the AUX department, but he is a practicing artist. That's his painting right there behind us. So I would say for what I saw of him after we graduated, we both graduated in 2015, is that you should find time for your practice. So whatever it is for you to continue writing, if that is what you're doing, create that space for yourself, and then just look at what it needs for you to sustain your life. So for him, he worked at Janney Elementary School in their like aftercare program, and that was his job during the day. And then he had his time to do practice. He knew he wanted to do his MFA. He applied to it. He just graduated from ICA. That there's also someone else I know, Austin, also is a poet. So they took the time to really center what their writing was about, what it is that they needed in order to do it. And they also did a hodgepodge of work. So there are those those of us from the lit program that did not go into, I would say, like traditional spaces after the lit, like I guess just generally like editing things of that nature, but they're still finding a way to do their craft. The same thing is really reaching out. A couple of us did reach out to other people from like workshops and things of that nature of what they did in order to also not have one thing bleed into the other, because that happens so often, is that you're really just entirely tired from what you're doing during the day, that you don't have the time, or it seems like it's going in the back burner. That what kind of tips and tricks they had in order to really bridge the gap between those two aspects of your life. So I hope that's helpful.
Mia, you're correctly calling out the fact that I don't have a creative writing track person on this panel. For those of you who are more seasoned, you may know that we have tracks now, like accordingly. And I have to remember this for next time to like sure to like get someone who's specifically oriented around creative writing.
I also think, well, I was actually going to ask a follow-up question for you, Mia, in terms of like what specific that craft and creativity was. I think Middens maybe elaborated. Is it creative writing? Is it like wanting to get published and stuff? Yeah. Well, I think that there's like so many fellowships that have also emerged in the past couple of years that you can like also look into applying for. And if you ever wanted to talk about like specifically, like what a publishing route looks like and like how that's achievable, like I can also talk to you about what that looks like and like what steps you need for that. I'm not a creative writer myself, so I can't really offer advice in that sense, but in terms of, I guess, like the path to whatever your end goal is eventually, I would always be happy to talk.
Thank you both.
Other questions? This seriously has been an amazing chat. And the only tragedy of this and all of the participants like that I've asked here for this is that we cannot go out for a drink now to actually like debrief all of this, which is the sad part. But thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you for coming back. Thanks to all the students who are here as well. Thanks to everyone who is watching this after the fact. There are lots of folks who want to be here but are stuck in class and couldn't actually get to what's going on. This is super informative. And thank you.